Hello, RC from the Mountaintop Joiner Shop here. Welcome to part 6 of my modern desk build series. And I got a lot going on. It's spring, I gotta get my spring and my summer garden going. And I have to figure out how to do it without water because we skipped winter this year, so that's exciting. And I also have this desk here, which I have maybe about 3 weeks to finish before a certain someone's birthday. So I really got a lot to get done here. So why don't we just get right to it and start cracking. Okay, so where did we leave off? I don't know where we left off. It's been a minute. Oh, right. Yes, this. So I milled this material here to be the upper part of the work surface, and that's going to fit right here. So I've done much the same stuff that I did to the main part of the worktop, in that I went over the top with a belt sander, got it nice and smooth. I followed that up with the random orbit sander. Everything's nice and silky. And then I went ahead and trimmed it to fit inside of these aprons. And then I notched it out at the back corners here so it fit over the tops of the legs. And it fits just like that. And then I went over all these edges and put little chamfers on them because these tops both, well, they're inset inside of the aprons, do project above the aprons a little bit. So it's kind of a different way of going about a tabletop that's more modern, but also provides some challenges that I had to figure out. So that's where I'm at with this. And before I can glue this in place, of course, I got to finish out this interior structure where drawers are going to go. So there's going to be a drawer here and a drawer here. I have to put some drawer runners in. And I also have to do a little bit of joiners so I can attach both this top and a piece of wood that goes across the front here to kind of enclose this. And of course, that's going to be contiguous all the way across this opening here. So I'm going to have a contiguous piece all the way across here. That's going to have some curves cut here so I can have 2 drawer fronts, and then just a front here with some ports underneath it for cord management. Okay, so what am I going to do next? What I think I'm going to do is make some drawer runners to go with each of these drawer guides. So I have 4 of these pieces here, and you'll notice that there's a notch cut out in them, and that is a notch to hold down the worktop, so it's going to project underneath these notches. That'll hold it down, but there's going to be some space here that'll allow that top to expand and contract with seasonal changes in relative humidity. These are going to be important, and for other reasons as well, because the drawer guides are going to have to fit right behind that notch and match it in thickness. So the thickness of the drawer guide will come right up to the top of each of these notches. And the material that I found to do that with is right here. I don't have to go and find more material and mill it to fit into those spaces because I got this. This is the reason that I never throw out any of my offcuts until I've completely finished a project, because they often come in handy later. So this piece was actually ripped free from the actual worktop that's going to be fitting under this notch when I was making it nice and square. So I think it'll work out quite nicely as my drawer guides. I just have to cut them to length, just do a little bit of planing on them such that they fit behind these notches and run in parallel with this edge right here. So that is pretty awesome that I have this handy. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. They're going to get face glued to the bottoms of each of these drawer guides, and they'll act as drawer runners. All right, well, I'm at it. Why don't I show you one of these really quick? So I already squared off the end of this over there at the shooting board, and I'm just going to hold this piece up to this piece and line it up on the back just by feel. I'm going to mark this with a pencil just a little bit off of the edge of this, something like that. I'm going to cut that and then just trim it the rest of the way to match the flush to this with the shooting board. And then I'll show you a little trick that, if you have a bandsaw, is kind of nice. So here's something I wanted to show you. That's kind of a neat trick, I think. If you have a bandsaw and you do most of your rip cutting like that, and your bandsaw cuts square, then you can use the bandsaw marks to kind of track your progress when you're planing this, these bandsaw marks away, and to kind of keep this face perpendicular still. And I have bandsaw lines on both sides of this piece here, so I can show you with my jack plane. So I'm just going to go ahead and start hitting this. And I can keep track of those bandsaw marks as they disappear. If I have a clean edge here, but bandsaw marks along this edge, then I know I need to focus on the side that still has the bandsaw marks. And that way I can keep this face relatively square to the adjoining side here. So I'm going to do it on this side now, and usually to stay with the grain I'm going to flip end for end. And I'm hoping that with the light raking the way it is now that you can see this. Right now I'm cutting pretty square, but I need to focus a little bit more on the left towards the end of the cut here. Now if I take a square to this, this should still be pretty square to the edge for both of these faces, and I don't have to worry about messing it up so much. Next thing I did was take a wheel gauge and kind of take a measurement off of the notch that I cut earlier, and then I marked a line along the side. This does a couple of things. This reminds me which side that this is supposed to actually get glued to create my drawer runner. Also, if there's a little bit of glue squeeze out, hopefully it just goes into that knife line rather than squeezing out up onto the face here where I'll have to clean it off later. So it'll save me a little bit of trouble down the line potentially. And then I need, because this notch is actually shallower than the ones that are on the ends, the ones that are just inside the outside aprons on the desk, I need to cut this down or plane it down so it matches the thickness of that notch. Hope that makes sense. So I'm just going to pick one side and mark that with the same setting on the wheel gauge. Now because this is a small part, I can actually plane this down and keep it square by using my shooting board instead of trying to use the jack plane to do this. So it's kind of hard to see those wheel gauge lines, especially for you. I can still kind of see them. And because my shooting board has about this much capacity from here to here, normally what would be an end grain shooting board is now a long grain shooting board if your parts are small enough like this. So I'm just going to kind of read the grain as best I can and just plane it down this way. I find that the way that I apply pressure to this, right in the middle in this case, and pressing down, keeps this cut nice and square while I'm doing it. I can track my progress not only with the lines that are on the long grain here, but also the end grain where they're a little bit easier to see. Almost right on them. Looking good. And again, I can do all this planing, hopefully, without knocking anything out of square. Let's see how it lines up. That looks beautiful. I can just, if I make it flush to the bottom, it lines up to that knife line that I marked on this piece perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and face and glue that on there. Oh, and one more thing. So I put a little bit of an X right in this corner here with a pencil because I checked this face and this face and they are square to each other. And so that's the face that's going to be face glued to this drawer guide. And now I'm going to take a block plane and I'm going to remove a little bit of material on the inside corner here. So not a ton, just a little bit. What that little chamfer does is provide yet more insurance that if there's a tiny bit of glue squeeze out here when I face glue this on, that it'll just kind of be down in that little recess created by the chamfer, and I won't have to try to get in there and clean that glue squeeze out later. That's another little trick I like to use. And while I'm at it, I'm going to soften this other corner too. That way there aren't any sharp corners on the underside of the desk that somebody could potentially cut themselves on if for some reason, I don't know, they're crawling down under there like a critter or something. So that is going to go like that, and I'll glue that into place. Alright, just a little bit of high glue here. Hopefully that wasn't too much. This looks like it might be over here. So I'll kind of spread that around with the end of the bottle. And that goes here, just like this. And now with high glue, if you wanted, if these faces mated up perfectly, and they look like they do right now, you might not even need to clamp this. So if you're running out of clamps, you can do what they call a rub joint. You can see how I'm just moving this around a little bit. Moving it around, move it around, move it around. And as you do that, apply pressure and slide it back and forth. You'll feel the glue start to tack up. As it's starting to tack up, then you want to make sure that you line it perfectly. I'm going to get that glue off of there. Just press down, make sure it's nice and lined up. And if I just left it like that, as the high glue cures, it'll actually kind of pull that joint together even tighter. It kind of has a tendency to shrink as it cures. That would really be all I need to do. But I'm a belt and suspenders kind of guy. I'm still going to clamp this. So make sure that's nice and flush there like that. And put some clamps on there just to be sure that that glue line is good and tight. So I'm going to go ahead and set that aside and then do the last one, and we'll move on to the next obstacle. All right, so hopefully this dry fit gives you an idea what the project is ultimately going to look like. I'm starting to get pretty excited about it. It's starting to look pretty rad to me at least. So you can pick up when I'm laying down here. I now have drawer runners underneath these pockets here, this pocket and this pocket. And I'll bring you in closer so you can see what that looks like. So when I assemble this, the rest of this desk, this is the order of operations that's going to have to take place here. So this main worktop is going to be installed first, and that's going to be basically permanently installed. Normally when I build a table, I make it such that the top can be removed for whatever reason, but because of the modern nature of this design, it's going to have to be permanently installed, which means I'm going to have to prep it first. I have to bleach this still. And so I'm hoping to do that by the end of this video. The other thing that will happen after this is in place, well, all these guys are going to get glued in. It's going to get glued in here, it's going to get glued in here. And now I have the makings of a drawer pocket. So I have drawer guides on either side and drawer runners on either side. And you'll notice that there's an expansion gap here for this top to expand and contract with changes in relative humidity. And so that leaves a gap in the drawer runners as well, which isn't very conducive to smooth operation of drawers, but I have a plan for that. And I will show you what that is later on. And then after these are installed, I need to put a strip across the front of this. So I'm going to have a drawer here and a drawer here, but this is going to be a solid walnut front here. And that's going to attach to the fronts of these drawer guides. And there are going to be some holes underneath them to be cord ports in these positions here. And so once that is attached to the front of these drawer guides, then I can put that thinner upper top over the top of all of that, and that will also be permanently installed. Okay, so here is what I believe to be the final walnut piece of this puzzle. I went over to my lumber rack over here and found the last good piece of walnut that I had handy. Thankfully, I didn't have to go back to the lumber dealer for this. So I took this long strip of walnut and I milled it in very much the same manner as I did these aprons earlier in this series, which is to say that I got it nice and squared up and flattened, and then I ran it through the thickness planer with a wedge-shaped piece taped to the bottom of it in order to achieve a wedge shape that is very much like the aprons are. In fact, it's the exact same angle. So that kind of mirrors what's going on elsewhere in this piece. That's always a good design strategy, is to repeat certain themes throughout the piece that kind of echo each other. And so subconsciously we kind of pick up on that, and it makes the whole kind of experience of the furniture piece a little bit more harmonious, so to speak. So then I took that long wedged shape piece of walnut and then I trimmed it just a little bit over long to fit inside these side aprons here. And then I started cutting out these three pieces here. So I cut out a piece for this drawer front down here, and then I trimmed it with my shooting board plane until it just fit into that opening. Then I did the second piece such that it fits over the ends of these drawer guides here. Ultimately, they will be attached at those points. And then I had the last piece here to do for this other drawer front. I still have to run a smoothing plane over the face of this, and I still have to cut my cord ports underneath there as well. But that's one piece that is almost done, at which point I can then bleach this white oak. And while I'm doing that, I'm also going to be pre-finishing all the walnut in this piece. My go-to finishing strategy for walnut is to hit it with a coat of Danish oil first. I find that Danish oil makes the walnut nice and dark, nice and chocolatey brown, and that is definitely a look I go for when it comes to walnut. And then I will go over that with some de-waxed shellac. De-waxed shellac, if it's de-waxed, will stick to almost anything, and almost anything will stick to it. So I treat that shellac as kind of a binder coat, but it also has a little bit of depth to the finish, to the grain, to the wood, whatever you want to call it. And then I will ultimately go over this entire project with my spray gun using some Vermont Natural Coatings Polyway furniture finish. That stuff is awesome, and it's my favorite way to kind of put the cherry on top of the finish, so to speak. All right. It feels like I've been talking about this forever. Let's bleach some white oak, shall we? So the project I'm going to be using for this operation is this stuff here. This is Daly's Wood Bleaching Solution. I bought these 2 bottles at the local hardware store probably 15 years ago, thinking someday I would do some hyper-modernist design that would require me to bleach some white oak. And here we are, like 15 years later, ready to do it. And the bottles have gotten quite dirty in the meantime. They've been bouncing around in my finishing cabinet all this time. But I have my setup here, so I have the worktop on top of some sawhorses. The rest of the desk is over to the side, way out of harm's way. And how does this stuff work? That is a good question. So let's read the directions, shall we? Turns out the directions are on the back of the bottle in a 0.5 font, so I have to put on my old man spectacles to see what the hell is going on here. Okay, so this is why I bought these little cups here. What you're normally supposed to do is to mix equal parts A and B into a cup, at which point the clock is ticking and you need to apply that to your surface with a synthetic bristle brush, which I have bought specifically for this occasion. And that is the way it tells you to do it on the bottles. And then that is liable to raise the grain, at which point you'll need to go over the wood again. It says to do that with a 120 grit sandpaper. That is way too coarse in my opinion. I'm not going to do that. I'll probably use 180, probably actually 220. I'll see if I can get away with 220 and take it from there. However, on the internet, and the internet is never wrong about anything, right? On the internet it says if you want to make your bleached white oak extra bleachy, to apply the part A by itself with a synthetic bristle brush first, and then let that kind of dry most of the way, like 20-30 minutes, let that dry, and then go over it with part B. And since that's what I'm really going for here, I want to get this surface as close to white as I can without obscuring the grain and the reflex in this quarter-sawn white oak. So that's kind of what I'm going for. So that's what I'm going to try. I hope it works out. And what you need to wear safety-wise, they don't make any mention of a respirator. If it stinks, I'll open some windows, but I won't throw on a respirator for this. But you want to protect your eyes from getting any bleach in them. That makes sense. And of course, some gloves. These are nitrile gloves, and I have clothes on that I've already kind of wrecked, so I don't have to worry about destroying those. I'm kind of far away from anything that I can get kind of overspray on, so that is what we're going to do here. Let me get set up for that. We'll apply part A, let it dry, and then we'll do part B and see what happens. Okay, so I let this kind of sit overnight and do whatever it was going to do, and what it ended up doing, to my mind, is not satisfactory. Not quite at all. So, I'm going to stand up and show you this. So, the bleaching solution worked well on some boards and not others. This middle board here is a nice bleachy white. That's kind of what I was going for here. But you'll see these other boards, particularly this one down here, turned kind of a yellow color. It looked like it was treated with piss water, maybe with some asparagus in it. And the reason I think that happened is because this bleaching process is a chemical process. It reacts with chemicals that are present in the wood. And in the case of this white oak, the chemical composition in each board is slightly different and yields a slightly different result. So I have a board here that has some uneven color in it, which means I'm going to have to resort to plan B. You didn't think I didn't have a backup plan for this, did you? I have a backup plan B and a backup plan C, or what I call the nuclear option, but we'll try plan B first. This is General Finishes water-based wood stain in what they call a whitewash color. It's basically a translucent stain with, it's just titanium dioxide, I believe, and some kind of water-based carrier. And as such, it will obscure the grain slightly, but it'll also do a better job of evening out the color between the different boards in each panel. So that's what I'm going to apply next. But in order to ensure that this top and the smaller top kind of match each other closely, I have to apply that same bleaching solution to that other top, just so everything's nice and consistent. I don't want the lower top to look different from the upper top. So I'm gonna have to back up and treat that with the same wood bleaching solution, and then I'm gonna get out my spray gun to apply this so I'm able to apply it nice and evenly. I'm very glad this is a spray gunnable finish, if that's even a word. And it even tells you on the back what size spray tip to use for that. So I'm happy about that. I'm eager to give this a try and see if I can't get better results with that. Oh, and if you're wondering what Plan C is, aka the nuclear option, that is basically just paint it white. So it's more important to me, from my design sense, that these panels be white or very near white, more so than the grain patterns be visible. Ultimately, I would like them to be visible because I want it to be clear that this is actually a natural material that this tabletop is made out of, and not just, like a Formica countertop type material. But ultimately, I don't want, some boards to look yellow and some to look white. I need it to be much more evenly colored. If I have to, I'll paint it, but hopefully it doesn't come to that. So the next order of business is to sand this back a little bit because it did raise the grain quite a bit. Move it out of the way and bleach the other tabletop, and then I will get out my spray gun and see how that's doing. It might need a little bit of maintenance, and we'll go ahead and give this stuff a whirl. All right, so while that bleaching solution is curing on the other piece of the worktop, let's talk about spray guns for just a moment. Now, I've talked at length about choosing a finish and about different methods for applying finish in another video. If I have the link for that, I'll put it in the description. As far as spray turbines go, the main impetus for getting one is being able to apply finish very evenly. You don't have to worry about brush strokes or overlapping marks or any of that stuff. It's very easy with a spray gun to apply a finish in a way that is nice and uniform and professional looking. It also is quite quick once you get the hang of it. If you'll look at the state of my spray gun here, I'm probably not the guy to teach you how to use a spray gun. So I know just enough about it to get the results that I want. But if you want to learn more about spray finishing, the guys to look at are the automotive finishers. So they tend to use these HVLP guns for painting cars and things like that. They really know what they're doing. So if you want to pick up the ins and outs of spray finishing, I would look for a channel like that. The one that I have is the Apollo Eco 4 stage turbine. Apollo isn't a brand that I would recommend. I had one of the worst customer experiences I've ever had in my life with that company. So if I was doing it again, I'd probably buy like a Fuji spray system or something like that. But as far as the number of stages is concerned, basically all it means is the more stages a spray turbine has, the more ability it has to push through finishes that a weaker turbine might not be able to push through. So I could spray like a latex paint with this if I wanted to, which is quite thick stuff. But for the most part, I only spray two things. One is dewaxed shellac. The solvent for that is alcohol, so it's pretty easy to clean the gun out after that. And then the other thing I spray a lot of with this tends to be that Polyway, the Vermont Natural Coatings Polyway furniture finish. The cleanup for that is water and soap, basically, like detergent soap, dish detergent. That said, when you run two different finishes through a gun, it doesn't matter how good you clean it, you're going to get some buildup of some crud in there. It's just, I think that's just the nature of the beast. If I had the wherewithal and the funds to do so, I would have separate guns for separate finishes. So I'd have one spray gun that I would only ever put shellac through and then clean that out with alcohol. And then I would have another gun dedicated to the Polyway furniture finish, which I would always just clean out with water or soapy water. So I think I would have much cleaner guns if I did it that way, as opposed to this one that has different finishes constantly run through it. Okay, so I don't dare touch this right now because it's still drying, but I can't be happy enough with how this ended up working. This looks so good. And reflected light, you can see all the pores and all the reflex. You know that this is a natural surface underneath this white, and it looks so good. It's exactly how I pictured it in my head, and especially compared to how it looked after I applied the bleaching solution. It's just hitting the spot right here, man. This is so good. I am going to let this go ahead and dry overnight, and I still have to apply the Danish oil on the base of the desk. After all of that is cured, I can start applying film finishes. Now, when it comes to the film finish that's gonna go over this whitewash, the General Finishes top coats that they make actually explicitly warn that you shouldn't use it over a white surface like this because it does have a tendency to yellow over time. Fortunate for me, my go-to film finish, the Vermont Natural Coatings Polyway, does not yellow over time. So I'll be able to go ahead and use the top coat that I am most familiar with in the end, and that means good things for me because I know how that works. I know it's not going to throw me any curveballs, hopefully. So I am really excited with how this is looking, and so I'm gonna call it a day, come back in here tomorrow and apply the Danish oil to the base. Okay, so I'm back to the base of the desk and I'm doing that last little bit of finish prep before I put any of the Danish oil on. There's some areas of the desk that are going to be glue surfaces later, so obviously I don't want to get Danish oil on those. So I'm taping off those areas just to be safe. And if I encounter any kind of sharp edges anywhere, I'll soften those edges with a block plane or some sandpaper just in case. When it comes to applying an oil finish, I don't think there's any big secret to it. You basically just find a cloth, soak it with the oil, and rub that into your furniture piece. That said, it is important that you use a lint-free cloth. If you don't, you'll find out pretty quickly. You'll end up with lint stuck all over your furniture piece, and then you have to figure out how to deal with that before you can apply any potential coats over the top of that, like a top coat of some kind. Now, you can go ahead and buy lint-free cloth from most hardware stores and paint stores. Generally, you don't need to do that, though, if you have any old pieces of cloth laying around. Old t-shirt generally works pretty well. This one is an old piece of bed sheet. The Danish oil I'm using is Watco Danish oil. This is just the regular stuff from the big box store down the street. I get it in natural. It's very important to me that I only use natural Danish oil. In the past, I've tried some of the colored Danish oil. Basically, what it uses is pigments. Those pigments tend to obscure the grain and muddy it up. I really don't like that. So I tend to stick to clear finishes, the white worktop I'm dealing with notwithstanding, because those tend to enhance the color and the grain patterns in the wood and as opposed to hide them. So I like to show off the wood I'm using. And when I apply this, I've been experimenting a little bit. Rather than just wadding up the cloth and using it like that, I use a little bit of sponge. So this is just a square piece of cheap dish sponge that I've cut out. That square is bigger than the opening in the bottle, so when I tilt the bottle over to charge it with the Danish oil, it doesn't spill around the sides of it. And that I just kind of wrap up like this in the middle here and make what in finishing we call a rubber. I'm not kidding, that's what they call it. So I'm going to put a piece of tape around this if I can get a hold of it with my gloved hands. Generally use a rubber band, but I don't have any rubber bands handy, so I'm just putting some tape around this. So this is just a little experiment I'm trying out. Basically, with the sponge inside the cloth here, it has the ability to hold a lot more finish. So as I'm applying it, I can kind of keep going for longer before I have to recharge it again with the Danish oil. And I can control how much Danish oil I apply to the piece by how much I squeeze the sponge, basically. So I'm using a rubber for this purpose. We'll see how this goes. The other thing about Danish oil is it's quite stinky. There is a lot of VOCs in it, so I'm going to be wearing a respirator, and I'm not going to bother filming it because nobody wants to sit around and watch me rub my wood. All right, time to break out the shaky cam and take a look at that. That's what I mean by some dark chocolatey walnut, especially these legs. Anybody who's been making furniture for a while really can't appreciate how the wood transforms when you apply that first coat of finish and the wood kind of comes alive like that. Figuratively speaking, of course. The wood's actually, from a dead tree, but you know what I mean. That's starting to look real good. All right, it's the next day, so that Danish oil has had about 24 hours to dry. It really needs closer to 36 before you can coat over it. And like I was saying earlier, I do want to coat over it with some shellac using the spray gun. So I'm going to have to tape off even more of this project before I do that, because I have much less control over where finishing spray goes than I do just with, rubbing it with a rag. So that's what's yet to come. But before I move on, I want to share a couple things with you both about how this went, and also what I think is both a disclaimer and a helpful tip going forward if you're somebody who uses this Watco Danish oil with any regularity. So when I made that rubber using the sponge I was using was very old and very dried out and didn't want to absorb any finish at all or have any squish at all. So that didn't pan out so great. Apparently sponges do have a shelf life to them. Word of warning, if you're going to try that technique, use a new sponge. And then the other thing I'd like to tell you about is if you use any Watco Danish oil and then you set it aside for a while, you may find that the finish, the varnish in the finish, has glued that lid on there such that you cannot release it, not even with the jaws of life. You end up either throwing the can out or trying to jackhammer it open and get your finish out of a hole in the can or something. In the interest of not wasting finish, one thing that you can do is go to your local drugstore, pick up one of those tiny little bottles of Vaseline, aka petroleum jelly, and then just get a little dab, just a little dab will do you, put it on your finger and rub it on the threads of the bottle, and that will allow this cap to release again later on when you go to use that finish in the future. Of course, your results may vary, but trying to open this lid with a pair of channel locks and exhausting your vocabulary of curse words isn't very effective, or at least it wasn't for me. So try the Vaseline and see how that does for you. So it seemed that perhaps I'm a bit stuck at this point since I can't really apply the shellac to this and I can't really assemble the rest of this until I've gotten the shellac on the base, but there is things I can do. So what I think I'm going to start doing is milling the pieces for all the drawer sides. Well, I haven't really assembled the drawer pockets and have no way of measuring them that way. I do have a pretty good idea. I can measure the height of my drawer guides, both these for the small drawers and this one for the big pencil drawer. And of course, I know how deep my drawer pockets are going to be more or less. So if I just mill my stock just a little bit oversized, I should be able to get a head start on creating those drawers for after the rest of the desk is assembled. So I'm going to go into my pile of maple and start milling up some parts for the drawers. Well, I got started milling the parts for these drawers, and that really forced me to think about these drawer pockets and the odd shape that they are and how it's going to require me to employ some pretty unorthodox drawer making techniques in order to fill those drawer pockets. So be sure to stick around for that, should be interesting. I'm going to use traditional techniques, but the drawers, the overall form factor of them will be a little bit unusual, which I think is going to be pretty fun actually. In the meantime, it bled over into the next day. So it's the next day, and this morning the weather was just good enough for me to apply some spray finish again. If you'll recall, I put some Watco Danish oil on all these walnut parts of the base, and I need something to act as a binder coat between that Watco Danish oil and what my final film finish is going to be, which is the Vermont Natural Coatings Polywave Furniture Finish. The weather was like within the correct temperature range to apply this finish, and it wasn't too windy. I still got some dust nibs in here that I'm going to have to erase with maybe some brown paper bag or something, but that's just is what it is, it's fine. The product I used as a binder coat is this right here. This is Zinsser Bullseye Seal Coat. They call it a universal sanding sealer. I don't know what a sanding sealer even is. I've never felt the need to use a sanding sealer. To me, it's just finish. This is essentially a blonde de-waxed shellac in a 2-pound cut, and as such, it sprays very easily and it dries very quickly. So within an hour here, I'll be able to actually start clamping the top onto this desk. It'll finally start to look like a desk instead of this skeletal figure that I have sitting here. I'm going to continue milling drawer parts, but then I'm going to do the glue up, and I'll come back to you when it's time to do that. Okay, these are milled nice and flat. I need to do some edge joining still. We'll set these aside for now and we'll glue on the main top to the desk. We'll deal with that later. And while I got this area cleared, I'm going to sweep up because otherwise I'll be tracking all these shavings and sawdust and whatnot into the house. And if I don't sweep it here, I'm going to have to sweep it there. And of course, in the house, it'll be widely distributed. Whereas here, it's nice and concentrated. I can get it out of the way and also have a clutter-free shop to work in, which always helps my brain work better. I can't focus when there's crap everywhere. That includes shavings. So I think I've mentioned this earlier, but it bears repeating. I'm going to be gluing this top in more or less permanently. Normally I like to make a top of a table removable, but in this case, because of the kind of contemporary design I'm using here, I'm really relying on that top to stiffen up the whole structure. It'll make it strong like bull. So I'm going to be gluing it in place, which means I'm going to be putting glue on top of these drawer guides here, on top of these ledgers, just the first 4 or 5 inches or so, so the rest of the top can expand and contract and be held down with those tabletop clips. I'll also be gluing the leading edge right behind the aprons here, these front aprons. So I'm going to be clamping it from a bunch of different directions. Hopefully you can see here that I've removed the finish from the corresponding part of the top here. And I just did that with a card scraper, and so that way I get a good long grain glue contact right there, and it'll make everything super strong once the glue is cured. My go-to glue of choice is some liquid high glue. I buy the Tight Bond stuff because it's something I can source rather easily in my neighborhood. I don't like to have to mail order glue if I can help it. I need to warm this up though because it's kind of cold in here overnight, so I got it warming up in the corner of the shop. And I did do a YouTube short about how to warm up your high glue so it doesn't make a mess, so you have a little bit longer open time and it just flows a little bit easier. Check that out. I'll put a link in the description if I can find it. In the meantime, I get one of my Z-clips out and one of the screws I'm going to be attaching it with. What I need to make sure of is that the length of this screw isn't longer than the worktop is thick. Otherwise, I run the risk of that screw poking through the work surface, and that would be an epic disaster. So I have it put through the Z-clip here, or S-clip, or tabletop clip, whatever you want to call it. And I have a 1/8 inch brad point drill bit, such that it doesn't wander when I try to start to the hole. And I put a little piece of blue tape there at the end of the screw to denote when to stop drilling. So it doesn't physically stop it like a drill stop might, but it tells me when to stop drilling. That works fine for me. I haven't really had any accidents using this method. So that's my de facto drill stop, and now I'm ready to glue that top in place. All right, I got my high glue flowing like maple syrup now. Let's make this happen. So I'm gonna apply a little bit of glue here, and a little bit here, and a little bit over here, a little bit over here. I have to turn away from the camera and tip this up and put a little bit of glue at the bottom edge here, hopefully far enough away from the top edge that it doesn't squeeze out because that would stink. Let's go down here, do the same on this end, and then I'm going to have to stand right in front of you to do this, but it is what it is. Let's clamp the heck out of it. Get a clamp right here. Next thing I do is take a piece of paper towel and dip it in that same hot water that I was warming the glue with. This will allow me to wipe away any excess hide glue squeeze out, and then I'll just go ahead and dry it with the other end of the paper towel because I don't want to leave hot water sitting on top of a shellac finish, because if you do that, it'll make it look a little bit cloudy. So I'm going to go around anywhere there's glue squeeze out, I'll remove it this way. I might have to remove a clamp in order to do that, and then I'll put the clamp right back in place afterward. Well, like getting glue up, that provided plenty of excitement, but I was able to finish this right before the weekend. So this can sit like this all weekend, and the glue can cure, and hopefully that will yield one cohesive, rigid, furniture-shaped unit. And we'll glue on the next pieces when I come back from the weekend. Okay, I'm back after the weekend, and I'm continuing to glue up with these guys right here. This one and the one on the opposite side. This acts as both a drawer guide and a drawer runner and a ledger to support the top that's going to go over it. And you'll notice that there's an expansion gap here. I need to cover that expansion gap with a very thin piece of wood so that the drawer doesn't get hung up on it. Oh, and then another thing, before I glue this in, I took a file and just eased this corner right here. This will facilitate the entry of the drawer, and also the sharp edge that would have been there would have maybe taken some of the wax off the drawer side that I used to help the drawer slide smooth. So this helps with both of those things. Let's get that glued in. There it is, clamped in place. Just use a couple of these big squeeze clamps. These are pretty cheap to get from the local hardware store, and they're good for this kind of thing. And then a couple of these little mini F-style clamps that I like so much to kind of clamp it down to the ledger that was below it. Now I want to glue these guys in, which are going to be the opposite sides of each of those drawer pockets, but they're not ready yet. I need to attach this false front here to the ends of these pieces. I need to figure out how to do that. What I originally thought I might do is use a dowel jig to just dowel this into the fronts of these. However, this already has a wedge shape to it that will make it difficult to clamp the doweling jig to it. So I think that option is out. I think I'm just going to go the simple route and use little glue blocks in these corners, because this is going to be the interior of the desk where they're not really going to be encountered. I think that will be the simplest solution. Before I can glue those in place, I need to cut some cord ports in here. Now, these chord ports could be any number of shapes. I could just cut out a rectangular cutout in them. I could do a trapezoidal shape. I could just drill a circular hole through with Forstner bits and leave it at that. But in any case where you have a design decision to make, it's best to look at the piece you've already gotten started and take your cues from that. So here is what I'm thinking. Here is my drawer front for the big wide pencil drawer, and then the underside of this apron and drawer, you'll see there's a cutout here. This is a quarter circle and a quarter circle with a straight line in between them. Now I cut this with a French curve, so it's not a perfect quarter circle, but it's close. And so this really should be the shape of my chord port. So this is my setup over here at the drill press. This is the strip that I want to cut the chord port into. I have my markings here where I thought appropriate to create that kind of half oval cutout in them. And I have an 1.1/8" Forstner bit in here, and the drill press is set to the high end of the recommended RPM range in hopes that if I advance this nice and slow, it won't blow out the bottom wall of this strip here. Rather than have a chord port that drills straight through here, I thought it'd be cool to take a offcut that has the same taper to it and stack this on top of it. That way when I drill this hole, it's actually going to be drilling down at an angle from the face, the tapered face of this. And I think that will look a little bit cooler from the front and also make for a less sharp edge at the front of the chord port. So that's what I'm going for with this. Let's give it a whirl and see how it goes. Oh, and one more thing about this setup. So the center point on this Forstner bit, I don't really want to put it right on the edge of the workpiece because that's going to make the Forstner bit either want to flex away from the workpiece or push my fence back, neither of which is good. Besides, as I showed you earlier, this kind of quarter circle on the end of the port is not really going to be a true perfect circle because I used French curves on the front of that apron. I should be able to open up this curve a little bit in the end anyways. I have the center point of the bit up onto the face of this workpiece just a little bit to help it keep from wandering out of the cut. All right, so let's see how we did. Now I did want to splinter this out quite a bit right here, but like I said, I'm going to be addressing this corner on the spindle sander to make this less of a true perfect circle on this quarter circle cut here. So I'm going to go ahead and continue the way I'm going. I'm not too concerned about this. So I have 3 more of these holes to drill, and then I just need to cut a line directly in between them. All right, so I just barely got away with that. But if you're concerned about blowing out the edge of a workpiece like that, if you put a backer board against that, just like a sacrificial one, when you drill through it, that backer board will help support the exiting cutter on the Forstner bit, and it'll make it less likely you're going to get any blowout there. The main thing here that works in my favor is that the entry point is nice and clean. It's only back here where I have kind of fibers blown off of there. So now I need to remove the material in between the tops of these 2 half circles. And for that, I'm just getting in here with a wheel gauge, kind of adjusting it to match to the top of each of those circles, and then drawing a line right there. So I'm going to go ahead and knife that in. As far as the different options for removing the material between these 2 Forstner bit holes, one of the things I could do that most people would think of first is a bandsaw, but my bandsaw currently has a very wide blade in it that wouldn't fit in here, and I really don't want to have to go through the effort of changing my bandsaw blade. So another option I could use is to put a coarse blade in like my coping saw or perhaps my shop-made bow saw, this guy right here, which seems like it's a fun idea at first until you start cutting. The blade on this, when you're cutting a rip cut, is actually pretty slow cutting, and it's kind of difficult to control, and I don't know, it just seems like it would be awkward. Not to mention trying to clamp up this tapered piece into my leg vise. I think it holds better the way it is currently with these 2 F-style clamps on it. So what I'm going to do instead is just chisel this out, because I'm going to be addressing the inside of these chord ports with my oscillating spindle sander after this anyways. If the surface of this ends up a little bit rough because of the way I chopped it out cross grain with a chisel, it's not a big deal. It's going to get cleaned up afterward. So I have my lines marked with the marking gauge, and I'm just going to start splitting away material here. Here's a little piece. And I'm working at an angle to match the angle that I drilled in, which is perpendicular to this tapered face. So I'm not going straight down, I'm leaning a little bit. I'm also watching the split to make sure it's not splitting in the direction of my knife line. Obviously, I don't want to go over the knife line. I'm taking a little bit thinner cuts now. Lighter cuts are also less likely to precipitate peril. I think for a lot of chisel users, this would be more of a paring cut than a cut where you're tapping it. But I am the kind of person that prefers tapping for whatever reason. So there it is. It's cut out almost entirely just using a chisel. So I'm going to come in here with the oscillating spindle sander and just kind of clean this up right up to my knife line. And this should be looking pretty good after that. So this is the setup for my oscillating spindle sander. Now, if you'll recall from another episode where I used this machine, that the oscillating spindle sander by Wen that I've done a review on in days gone by has stopped oscillating. So I need to give them a call. I keep forgetting to do it, but eventually I will. And then at some point I will put up a channel update where I let you know what Wen did about this situation, if anything. In the meantime, I got a 1-inch spindle in there. It's a pretty coarse spindle. It's probably 80 or 100 grit. Enough to remove material is basically what I'm going for. And I'm using, again, the tapered offcut trick to get this opening to be the angle that I need it to be. Now this offcut actually is starting to develop a bow, so you can see it's a little bit gappy, but I can just kind of hold this down with my hands and achieve the angle that I'm going for here. And I have my vacuum plugged into here so I can keep the dust down to a minimum. That said, it still kicks out a lot of dust and I don't want to get that dust in and on my expensive camera. So I'm not going to really show you an action shot of me doing this, but you can rest assured that it's not that exciting to watch somebody use an oscillating spindle sander, I promise. Okay, so that ended up working out beautifully. So I finished with the spindle sanding and came over here to the bench. I wrapped a piece of 220 grit sandpaper around my finger to kind of clean it up a little bit more, soften these edges, and now it's starting to look like a chord port. But what I have to do next is to take a couple passes over the face of this with my smoothing plane, and then it receives the exact same finishing treatment as the walnut on the base of the desk did, so they all match, which means I'm going to have to apply some Danish oil to this, carefully avoiding the spots where my glue blocks are going to go and later on. And then I'm going to have to pass over it with a spray coat of shellac, and then I'll be in a position from which I can glue it to these drawer guides. While I let the Danish oil cure on this, I've been working on the glue block that's going to attach it to the drawer guides. And normally what you do for a glue block is just find a squarish piece of stock, and then you'll just stick it in that corner and glue it into place like so, cut it to length, and that's that. But you'll notice that this is a pretty small glue surface area. You know, you could use a bigger piece of squarish stock to do that with, and that'll help. But ultimately, I would like it to be a little bit stronger than that. So I came up with an idea. You recall that earlier I ended up rejecting one of these drawer guides, actually a pair of them. So I had those were ready to go. So they were all squared up, they were milled, everything was peachy, except they ended up being cut with a notch that was too deep. So I ended up rejecting those. I drew an X on them and set them aside. Well, those ended up being the perfect stock from which I could create a different kind of glue block. So I just ripped a piece free on the bandsaw and then cleaned it up with my shooting board plane, and then I doweled it like that. And so now I have a glue block kind of like this. And so now if I put this into this corner, I have a ridiculous amount of glue surface area holding this together. And not only that, but I also have the physical aspect of this dowel joint, keeping the front walnut piece, mechanically speaking, from coming loose as well. So that's super strong. And so that's what I'm going to end up doing. I use my Dalmax jig with a 5/16 dowel in it, and that ended up being just a perfect fit for that corner there. So that's what I'm going to be doing for my glue block. Earlier I pointed out this expansion gap here on this drawer runner. Thankfully I had stock left over from when I ripped the back end off of this top. It's the same material I used for the drawer runner itself, and I had extra of it. So what I did was cut some to length and then cut it into very thin strips using the bandsaw. And now I have strips that can go right over the top of this runner, and now this becomes the runner. It spans that gap, and it gives just a little bit of space there such that the drawer isn't running directly on top of the desktop here. So all I need to do is clean out these bandsaw marks on the undersides of these. so I can get a good long grain glue surface under there. And I will show you how I go about doing that. So I've had occasion to plane down thin strips like this in the past. So what I ended up doing is creating a little planing sled for my block plane. So what I did is just make a rabbet and some oak to create some rails, glue those down to a piece of plywood, and then at the end of it I just took a scrap piece of cherry about the same thickness as these little rails are and glued that to the end there. And now I can drop a strip like this into here, and my block plane runs right on top of these rails, and I can control the thickness of these strips just by the depth of cut with the Norris adjuster on the block plane itself. So all I need to do now is adjust my depth of cut and go ahead and smooth these out using the block plane. Back to some shaky cam footage. You can see I got the cord ports cut, and this is in position with those corner blocks that I showed you earlier. I ended up tapering the inside of those corner blocks so they don't interfere with the cord ports. And then you can see I have the little oak strips there to act as drawer runners underneath. And so I have my drawer pockets kind of taking shape. And I just wanted to show you kind of the inside of this one last time before I glue the secondary top onto the rest of the desk. So while I was going through the process of gluing all that stuff at the back end of the desk in place, I went ahead and started to fit the parts to this drawer opening for the pencil drawer in the front. So I got a bunch of stuff milled for that purpose, and I've kind of had to change my tune as far as my plan for dovetailing this drawer. What I was originally going to do is make some super sick angled dovetails into this drawer front here. These would have been half blind dovetails, very similar to what I got going on the inside of this apron. But it's very, very important that this drawer front line up perfectly with the aprons on either side of it. And I just don't know of any way to do that where I really can guarantee this. In fact, it's highly unlikely I'll get it to line up as well as I want it to by doing that. So what I'm going to do instead is create a drawer with an applied front. So this drawer front I just showed you is going to be applied to the front of a drawer box, and that drawer box will be the part that's actually dovetailed. So here's my part that's going to fit inside of this opening, and I don't know how other people fit drawers. I just kind of organically come up with my own way of fitting drawers that may or may not be true to tradition. But what I do is I mill my parts until they just barely cram into the drawer opening. So you can see that this front here just barely fits in here. And so I'm going to go ahead and dovetail this drawer box and then trim it to fit into the drawer pocket once it's done like that. So that's going to be the front, and you can see there's a dovetail on the top of this here. That's because this drawer is so wide that I thought it prudent to put a center divider in the drawer, both for the sake of organizing things like folders and whatnot, but also give the drawer bottom something that I can attach to in the middle of the drawer and help prevent it from sagging. Right here I have my drawer sides ready to go. In fact, I've already started to mark the dovetails out on the ends of these. And again, they fit into their openings just barely. So once I get this in here, there's almost no wiggle to it at all. Almost no wiggle at all going on there. Another thing about this drawer pocket that affects the design of the drawer ultimately is how deep it is. Now, it's very helpful for your drawer to be at least as deep as it is wide in terms of being able to get it to slide in and out smoothly. If you have a drawer pocket that is very shallow but very wide, getting that drawer to slide in and out without binding is very difficult. So I left the drawer pocket as deep as the desk is for that reason. That said, I don't really need all that depth in the drawer. Like, somebody's going to be sitting here working, right? So they're already going to have to scoot back a little bit to access whatever's in this drawer. If this drawer is as deep as the drawer pocket is, then that just doesn't even make sense. So what I'm going to end up doing is making this drawer a full extension drawer. So the actual drawer box is only going to be about yay deep, but the drawer sides are going to continue to extend all the way to the back of the drawer pocket. That way, when you draw this drawer out, you can draw it all the way out until the back of the drawer is visible, and it won't just fall out of there. So if it doesn't make sense now, it probably will once it's all built and ready to go. But that's kind of what I'm going for with the construction of this drawer. And here's the upper top glued in place, and you can see that where I needed to apply more pressure. I didn't have the specialty deep reach clamps required to apply it. I just used a couple of dumbbells and used gravity to hold that position. And if it takes more than a 15-pound dumbbell to do so, then you probably should have got better joinery. That's my opinion on that. But dumbbells do come in handy for this kind of thing. All right, so I'm putting a lot of hours in and doing a lot of woodworking and a lot less filming because I got to get this done. My apologies if you're missing out on anything, but you can rest assured that I've either covered many of these things in the past or I will in the future. And so it is what it is. So this is what the big pencil drawer is looking like so far. You can see I got a big center divider here, and that is through dovetailed to the drawer front because this is going to have a front applied to it. So there's no point making that a half blind. I did make the back one a half blind. I don't really know why. I mean, nobody really cares. It's the back of the drawer, but that's what I did. And then the back of the drawer box you can see is set in from the end of the drawer sides. These drawer sides are effectively full extension drawer sides, and I will show you that in just a moment. But this back is doweled into the sides. And then you can see in the front here, I plowed a groove for the drawer bottom to fit into, and I put some drawer slips into the sides here that of course align with that groove. And if you're curious about drawer slips, I did a whole video on that did very well actually, and I covered that extensively there. So I'll put a link in the description if I can remember to. This is almost ready to go. I just need to apply the drawer front, and of course that is pretty critical to the design of this piece. So I think I have a good plan for how to do that, however, so I'm not too scared. Let's give it a shot. All right, so let me show you my plan for applying the drawer front here. There's no bottom put in this drawer at the moment, and there won't be for a little while yet because I haven't cut the bottom out. But let's slide this in here. So you can see how this acts as a full extension drawer, and once it slides in place, it's nice and buttery. I think once there's wax on there, it'll just be a beautiful fit. And this is one of the reasons that when somebody asks me for metal drawer slides, I just kind of go, ew, because there's nothing like the wooden drawer that fits perfectly in a wooden drawer pocket, to my mind. I think it's just a thing of beauty. Anyways, so I have it just so that it fits behind these upper and lower dividers. So that means it's not going to interfere with me clamping the actual drawer front, the applied drawer front in place. So what I'm going to do is put clamps here and here right over the gap to make sure that it lines up perfectly with the aprons on either side of it. And of course I have to get it kind of centered so the gap on the left and right sides is as even as I can make it. But once it's clamped like that, I can then move the drawer forward in the pocket until it makes contact with the back of the applied front, and then just clamp it in place. Wish me luck. Before I actually do this with glue, I decided to do a dry run, and that's when I thought it might make sense to take one of the offcuts that are tapered like the drawer front is, and then put it on the front of the drawer front in an opposing manner, such that it allows me parallel clamping surfaces. I have that held in place with some green frog tape. You can see I got some little F-style clamps holding the drawer front in place. These clamps have just enough depth to them that I can reach underneath the lower drawer divider and clamp this in place. So I think we're sitting pretty here. All I have to do is glue it on. All right, now I'm doing the dovetails for the little drawers, and I thought I had already said everything I could think of that needed to be said about dovetails in previous videos, including the one I did recently called The Opposite of a 1-Minute Dovetail. In fact, I think I did a couple of those videos. But I just discovered something that I think is pretty sweet and a pretty useful tip for people who are doing this kind of thing. So normally when I try to line up my tailboard and the corresponding pin board with each other for transferring the markings from the dovetails to that pin board, I would put the pin board in the vise, make it flush to another piece of the drawer that's about the same thickness, and then shove that back here. And then I'd put my tailboard on there and try to get it nice and aligned visually to the crack down in the corner there. And I could feel the ends of the tails to see if they're flush with the face of the pin board. And then hopefully it's square this way. And this is the part where it can get a little bit tricky. Things can get off this way a little bit. And then you end up building a drawer that has kind of a twist to it. So what I started to do was line up a square with the pin board. And then I can inspect visually and put this up to the stock of the square and get it all lined up that way. And that works pretty good, but it made me think, I wish this blade was thick enough that I could put it up against this piece and this piece at the same time. And then it occurred to me I do have a square that can do that. It's called a saddle square. So this guy right here is just a Veritas saddle square. And what I can do with that is just put it up against my pin board like so. Line up my tail board into the corner of that saddle square, and it lines up perfectly, just like that. I don't have to visually inspect. I don't have to feel for anything. I know that's lined up perfectly just the way it is. Give that a try. Try using a saddle square to align your dovetail pieces for transferring the marks. Now I'm working on these small drawers, and I'll show you kind of the unusual construction of those in a minute, but first we'll talk about these drawer pulls. So I just took some thin walnut stock, and then I rounded off the corners using chisels and rafts and files and sandpaper, and these are basically the negative shape of the cord ports that I've already put in the front of the desk. So once again, I'm echoing a design element that's already present in the design, and so that's always a good thing to do. And what it's going to end up doing is being let into the tops of these drawer fronts. So what I did to accomplish this was to measure the length of the drawer front and then measure the length of the pull and minus the length of the pull from the length of the drawer front. Divide that by 2, and that gives me the distance from the end of the drawer front to put a little mark. So I just put little pencil marks there and there, and then I lined up my drawer front with those pencil marks, and that way I know that it's centered. And I just kind of held it in place and marked the ends with a marking knife. Then I deepened those marking knife lines with a chisel, and then started to cut some curves using my Dozuki razor saw here. And so I put my end cuts in, and in between those end cuts, I put multiple curves along the way, right down to the baseline that I cut with my wheel gauge. And the reason I put all these curves in is it's very similar to mortising like a hinge mortise, whereas with the hinge mortise you would chop down with your chisel and then remove the waste that way. It's the same principle here, except because this is so deep, it's easier to do those extra cuts with a saw than it does pounding down with a chisel. And the reason that all these extra curves are here is if you're trying to pare away this waste cross grain and the wood wants to split, hopefully that split doesn't run down into your keeper part of the drawer front. So this helps preclude that. If there's any kind of splitting, it'll reach to the curve and then it'll just break off there. Now that I've got all these curves cut, I'm going to go ahead and pare away all this waste cross grain with a paring chisel right down to those baselines. And the end result should look something like this. So that just press fits right into there, nice and clean, flush to the back. And now I have a nice drawer pull in the front of these drawers. That said, I mean, they look okay, but they're a little bit boring in my opinion. What I'd like to do is put a couple of copper pins in here, maybe 3. And that way when you pull the drawer out, some shiny bits of copper reveal themselves, and they'll add a nice little decorative bit of pizzazz to the design. So that's what I'm going for with these drawer fronts. Now I'm making the copper pins for the drawer handles, and the material I like to use for that is just these copper nails that I picked up from the local hardware store. In fact, I have them in a couple different lengths. These I think are used for roofing or something like that, but I think that copper and walnut in particular go really well together. I think that looks great. So what I'm going to do is use these nail shafts as my copper pins. So I need to remove the heads from these nails. And when I measure them with a pair of dial calipers, it turns out that these are about an 1/8 inch thick, so that's pretty convenient. So I drilled an 1/8 inch hole through a scrap piece of oak with a drill press, and now I can just drop a nail right into that. I have this piece of oak secured with some holdfasts, and then I just cut the head off with a angle grinder. So I have metal cutting wheel in here, which is pretty tired, but I think it'll still work for copper. And I have swept the floor, moved my shavings bucket out of the way because I don't want to set my shop on fire. And that reminds me, if you don't have a fire extinguisher in your shop, you ought to get yourself one of those. So I'm going to put this nail down close to the wood and just cut it off right above the head. Like that. Of course, you want to keep track of where that head went because it's probably pretty hot right now, and make sure it did land somewhere where it can catch something on fire. So I'm going to do a bunch of those, and then I'll have my copper pins ready to insert into the drawer pulls. So here's one of my drawers. I got it all glued up, including the drawer pull, and that's glued in place as well. And I was just laying out where I'm going to be drilling the holes for these copper pins. So what I did was measure the drawer pulls where I'm going to put all my layout lines, and I put some tape over that section and then put my layout lines on top of the tape. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons is I don't want to have to try to erase these pencil lines later on after this is all said and done. I also need to protect the surface because once I drive these copper pins into place, chances are I'm going to have to file a little bit of the tops of them off to get them closer to flush, and then I'll be able to sand them flush from there. But I don't want to accidentally tag the top of the drawer with a file and ding it. So I might actually add more tape when I go to do the filing part of this operation. But I'm going to take this over to the drill press and I'm going to drill my holes 1/64 of an inch smaller than the 1/8 that these nails measure. Because as you saw when I was cutting the heads off of them, those 1/8 inch holes don't really hold the nail very well. They're a little bit gappy. So one thing else that I also noticed was that this green frog tape doesn't actually take a pencil line very well. If you'll see this other drawer, I use blue tape on that, which is what I normally use, and it takes a pencil mark much better. And even though it's a darker color, I can see those pencil lines much more easily. So something I learned just now. And so I'm gonna go take this over to the drill press and drill those holes. Now I'm driving these copper pins home. The walnut isn't as forgiving as I hoped it would be, so when I try to put these in, they feel pretty tight. So I actually put a bunch of paste wax on these nails, and I'm hoping that helps drive them home a little bit more easily. I'm just using my little Warrington pattern hammer. This is a 4-ounce hammer. It's really good for this kind of stuff. I put some extra tape over these just to keep it safe. I got a couple of regular metal files here. This one's actually a chainsaw file, believe it or not. And this one, I don't remember where I got it, but it seems to work pretty well. I don't know much about files, so I'm not really going to talk to you about that. Hopefully you can figure that out on your own by searching the internet. I'm just trying to keep the file as parallel to the surface as I can and working it down. I have the drawer secured with some dog holes and a surface clamp to keep it from moving around. If I really tag the tape along here, then I can always remove it and put a new piece down, but I'm doing my level best to keep it, level. About as flush as I can get it without digging through the tape there. Once I remove it, I should be able to sand it the rest of the way flush. So you can just barely feel with your finger that it's mounded just a little bit. I'm totally cool with that. It looks flush and it almost feels flush. If it sticks out a little bit, that to me is just a handmade product, kind of, showing its true colors. So because of the way the drawer pockets ended up for those smaller drawers, I ended up having to make the drawers in a little bit unusual fashion to match them. So on one end, I had hand-cut, angled, half-blind dovetails, and on the other end of those walnut drawer fronts, they look like they're applied. So that was a little bit funky the way that worked, but in the end they turned out really nice. So just like that, the desk that I had been building in my head and in my shop for months on end, it is done and it is out of here. I finished the spray finishing out back here, then I moved it directly into the backyard where I snapped a couple quick photos with my cell phone, and then I put it from there directly into the van, and then the very next morning I delivered it to the client just in time for the recipient's birthday. It was quite a whirlwind at the end there, and if I glossed over any techniques or any aspects of the build that you wanted to know more about, please let me know in the comments. Those could potentially be subjects for future videos. And I have other ideas for future videos as well, so I'll probably be popping up my bald head pretty soon with some of those. And as always, I hope you'll join me then. Appreciate you watching. Take care. Now, if you like what you saw here, please hit like and subscribe. It'd help me out a lot. Also hit the little bell icon if you want to be notified anytime I release a new video. And if you didn't like what you saw here, keep it to yourself, pal. Or watch one of my other videos. You might like one of those. Thank you for watching.